Hi, I'm glad to see you on my channel. Today I'll tell interesting stories from Greek mythology. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you are standing at the very edge of the ancient world. The real ancient world, vivid, breathing, trembling with divine energy. A world where the sky was not simply the sky, but the living body of something enormous and conscious, where the sea had a personality and a temper, where mountains spoke in earthquakes and rivers whispered in dreams. Tonight we are going to tell the story of Athena, not just a goddess, not just a symbol painted on shields and stamped on coins, but one of the most profound and carefully constructed figures in all of ancient human imagination. She was wisdom. She was war, but a particular thoughtful, strategic kind of war. The kind that seeks not chaos, but resolution. She was the patron of craftspeople and weavers, of philosophers and judges, of cities and civilization itself. She was born in the most extraordinary way ever recorded in any mythology on Earth. And her birth was not merely a miraculous event, but the culmination of a story that began long before she existed. A story rooted in fear, in prophecy, in the deep anxiety that even the most powerful beings in the universe carry within themselves. So let us begin at the very beginning, before Athena, before even the thought of Athena, in a time when the world was younger and stranger than we can easily imagine. The ancient Greeks believed, and recorded in texts that have survived thousands of years of wars and fires and floods and forgetfulness, that before Zeus ruled the heavens, before the Olympian gods sat comfortably on their mountain thrones, the universe was governed by a different generation of divine beings entirely. These were the Titans, enormous, primordial, ancient beyond measure, born from the union of Gaia, the earth herself, and Uranus, the sky. The Titans were not evil exactly, but they were old in the way that darkness is old, in the way that deep water is old, carrying within them something pre-rational, something that existed before order was established and before the concept of justice had been invented. The Titans were the world before it understood itself. Among the Titans, one of the most important, one of the most fascinating to our story, was a figure named Metis. Her name in ancient Greek means something that translates imperfectly into English as wisdom or cunning or practical intelligence. Not wisdom in the abstract, floating sense, but wisdom as a tool. Wisdom as the ability to perceive the true nature of a situation and respond to it with perfect precision. Metis was the daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, making her part of the vast family of water deities, which is itself significant. Water in ancient Greek thought was associated with depth, with what lies beneath the surface, with the hidden currents that determine the direction of things. Metis was the goddess who understood what was hidden, who could see beneath the surface of any situation and grasp its essential truth. She was, by every account, extraordinary, and Zeus wanted her. Now Zeus at this point in the story was still relatively young as gods measure time, still fierce and ambitious and hungry, in the way that young rulers always are, still proving himself after the Great War against the Titans, the Titanomachy, that 10-year cosmic battle that shook the foundations of creation and ended with the elder gods imprisoned in the darkness of Tartarus, the deepest pit beneath the earth. Zeus had won. He had divided the universe with his brothers. Poseidon received the seas, Hades the underworld, and Zeus kept the heavens and claimed dominion over the earth and everything upon it. He sat on Olympus, and he was, in every conceivable sense, the most powerful individual in existence, And yet power, as every student of history knows, has never been sufficient protection against anxiety. The more you have, the more you fear losing it. Zeus knew this instinctively, and he had reasons for his fear that went deeper than ordinary insecurity. He knew because the knowledge was woven into the very fabric of divine consciousness, what had happened to his father Cronus and to his grandfather Ouranos before that. He knew the terrible pattern that seemed to govern the succession of divine rulers. Each one was eventually overthrown by his own offspring. Ouranos had tried to prevent this by stuffing his children back into the earth, into the body of Gaia, pressing them down into darkness so they could not rise against him. It had not worked. Gaia had conspired with her children, and the youngest Titan, Cronus, had castrated his father with an adamantine sickle, sending Ouranos howling into permanent exile. Then Cronus himself, having learned nothing useful from his father's fate, had tried a different solution. He swallowed his own children as they were born, consuming them one by one. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each one disappearing into the enormous darkness of his stomach. This too had not worked. Zeus had escaped, raised in secret on the island of Crete, and had eventually returned to free his swallowed siblings and wage the war that ended Titan rule forever. Zeus had studied this pattern very carefully. He understood what it meant. The universe, it seemed, operated according to a logic that even gods could not simply defy. A logic of succession, of the child inheriting and ultimately surpassing the parent, of power passing from one generation to the next through conflict that could be postponed but never truly prevented. The question was not whether this would happen to Zeus. The question was how and through whom. And then, as if the universe wanted to make absolutely certain that he would never sleep peacefully again, Zeus received a prophecy. Prophecies in the ancient Greek world were not like modern fortune-telling, not vague poetic riddles designed to be interpreted after the fact. A true divine prophecy, as the Greeks understood it, was a direct transmission of knowledge from the realm of absolute truth, where time does not flow in one direction, but exists all at once, where past and present and future are simply different aspects of a single eternal reality. When a prophecy was given by a genuine divine source, it was not a warning that things might go a certain way. It was a report of what was already true from the perspective of eternity, a message from outside time itself. The prophecy Zeus received told him this, that Metis, if she bore him children, would first give him a daughter equal to Zeus himself in wisdom and in power, and then would give him a son who would surpass his father and eventually overthrow him, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus and Cronus had overthrown Ouranos. The cycle would continue. The pattern would repeat itself, unless somehow Zeus found a way to interrupt it. Think about what it means to receive that kind of knowledge, to know with perfect certainty that the being you love, the being whose wisdom you treasure above all others in the universe, carries within her the seed of your own destruction. To know that the children you might have together, the very expression of your love and your union, will ultimately end you. This is not ordinary fear. This is the specific, intimate terror of knowing that the future is already written and that it is written against you. We should pause here and appreciate that the ancient Greeks, in creating this story, were doing something extraordinarily sophisticated. They were not simply telling an adventure tale about gods and battles. They were exploring one of the deepest and most enduring psychological questions in human experience. What do we do when the things we love most are the source of our greatest danger? when the continuation of what we value requires its own transformation, its own eventual transcendence of us. Every parent who has raised a child who grew to be more capable than themselves, every teacher who has trained a student who eventually surpassed them, every ruler who has nurtured the conditions of a society that would eventually outgrow the need for that particular kind of rule, all of them have encountered in some smaller, human-scaled version exactly the dilemma that Zeus faced when he heard that prophecy. But Zeus, being Zeus, responded not with philosophical acceptance, but with action. He was a god of storms and lightning, after all, not a god of quiet contemplation. He was young and powerful and deeply unwilling to accept the verdict of fate without at least attempting to negotiate with it. And so Zeus made a decision that would echo through all of Greek mythology for the rest of its existence, a decision so bold and so strange that it has fascinated scholars and storytellers and ordinary people for thousands of years. He decided to swallow Metis, not metaphorically, not symbolically in some poetic sense that we might find more comfortable. He actually swallowed her. She was pregnant with their first child at the time, the daughter the prophecy had foretold. And Zeus swallowed Metis whole, taking her entire being into himself, consuming her wisdom and her power along with her physical form, absorbing her utterly into his own divine body. Now, the ancient sources differ slightly on the details of how this was accomplished, because Metis, being the goddess of cunning and practical wisdom, was not easily caught or deceived. Hesiod, writing in his great cosmological poem The Theogony around the 8th century before the Common Era, tells us that Zeus used guile, that he tricked Metis with smooth and flattering words, luring her close enough to catch her off guard. This is itself a remarkable detail, that Zeus, in order to absorb wisdom, had to use a kind of wisdom, a crude and ruthless version of the very quality he sought to contain. Other versions of the myth describe Metis as a shapeshifter, like many water deities in ancient Greek tradition, capable of transforming herself into various creatures to escape, and suggests that Zeus matched her transformation for transformation until he found his moment. Either way, the outcome was the same. Metis was swallowed and became part of Zeus, dwelling within him like a second consciousness, a second intelligence, turning and thinking and continuing her own existence inside the body of the king of the gods. And here is where the story takes a turn that moves us from the realm of divine politics into something stranger and more dreamlike, something that touches on questions about the nature of consciousness and thought, and where ideas actually come from. Because Metis did not simply cease to exist inside Zeus. She continued. She continued thinking, continued working, continued being herself in that inner darkness, and the pregnancy continued. The child she had been carrying when she was swallowed continued to grow and develop inside Zeus himself, nourished by the divine energy of the most powerful being in the universe, taking shape over a period of time that the ancient sources measure in different ways. Some say months by divine reckoning, some say years, some simply say a very long time. During this period, Zeus ruled Olympus and the cosmos with his usual combination of authority and excess, his usual lightning bolts and decrees, and love affairs and quarrels with his siblings, and the general rowdy business of being the king of the gods. And inside him, quietly, in the deep interior darkness of his divine body, something was growing. Something was being prepared. Something was, in a very real sense, thinking itself into existence, because it carried within it the essential nature of its mother, that deep, penetrating, practical wisdom combined now with all the power and divine energy of its father. We can imagine, if we allow ourselves to drift a little into the mythological imagination, what it must have been like for Métis in there, inside the god who had consumed her, to continue thinking in that warm, dark, enclosed space, to continue caring for the child growing within her, even while she herself was within another. There is something in this image that is strangely peaceful if you let yourself sit with it. The idea of being held completely, of thinking in darkness, of a creation growing in secret and in safety, protected on all sides by something vast and powerful, until the moment of emergence. Now, before we follow that pain to its extraordinary conclusion, let us settle a little more deeply into this story. Let us allow the images to form slowly and clearly in that comfortable darkness behind your closed eyes. Let us feel the weight of what we are about to witness. Because what happens in this chapter is not simply a spectacular divine event, not simply a miracle to be cataloged alongside other miracles. What happens in this chapter is the moment when all the tensions we explored in our first chapter, the tension between power and its limitations, between love and fear, between the attempt to control fate and fate's absolute indifference to being controlled, all of those tensions find their release. All of that compressed energy, that divine pressure that has been building inside Zeus for however long the gods measure such things, finally finds its way out, and what comes out of it is Athena. But let us not rush. The best stories, the ones that stay with you long after you have heard them, are the ones that take their time, that let each moment breathe. Let us go back to Olympus and find Zeus where we left him, on his golden throne, ruling the universe with his usual authority while carrying his impossible secret. Time has passed. How much time is difficult to say precisely, because divine time and human time operate according to different principles entirely, like two rivers flowing side by side but at completely different speeds. What we know is that enough time has passed for the child growing within him, within Métis within him, to develop fully, to become completely herself, to accumulate all the qualities and characteristics that she would carry with her into her existence as a goddess. She had been growing in the most extraordinary incubator ever conceived, surrounded on all sides by the wisdom of Métis and the power of Zeus, nourished by the concentrated divine energy of the King of all gods, shaped by the interaction of those two enormous forces into something that was, in a very real sense, the synthesis of both. Think of what that means for a moment. When we are shaped in the womb, we are shaped by the specific qualities of our parents, by their genetic inheritance, by the environment of that first enclosed world. We emerge already ourselves in some essential way, already carrying the seeds of who we will become. Now imagine that the womb in which you developed was not merely a physical space, but a space charged with cosmic significance, a space defined by the most acute practical wisdom ever possessed by any being in the universe on one side, and the most concentrated divine authority and power ever assembled on the other. You would emerge, when you finally emerged, as something that had absorbed and synthesized both of those things. You would emerge as something genuinely new, not simply a combination of your parents, but a new thing that had never existed before and could not have existed any other way. This is who Athena was becoming, there in the divine darkness, thinking her first thoughts in a space that was simultaneously her mother's consciousness and her father's body. A space that was neither entirely Métis nor entirely Zeus, but something that existed in the overlap between them. and then the headache began. The ancient Greek sources describe it in terms that manage to be simultaneously comic and cosmic, which is something the Greeks were extraordinarily good at. Finding the human scale within the divine, making the gods recognizable by giving them experiences that any person could understand and relate to. Zeus had a headache, not a mild discomfort, not a slight pressure behind the eyes that might be relieved by rest and a cup of cool water. A headache of absolutely unbearable, world-splitting, reality-threatening intensity. A headache that the Homeric tradition describes as feeling like his skull was being split open from the inside, like something was pressing outward against the boundaries of his divine consciousness with a force that nothing in existence could contain. And of course, nothing could contain it, because what was pressing outward was not a disease or an injury or even an ordinary divine affliction. What was pressing outward was Athena, fully formed, fully herself, fully armored and equipped for the existence she was about to enter, trying to be born into a universe that had never seen anything quite like her. The scene that follows is described with varying degrees of detail across different ancient sources, but the essential elements remain consistent across all of them: the unbearable pain, the gathering of the gods, the intervention of a divine figure with a sharp instrument, and then the eruption, there is really no other word for it, of Athena from the head of her father in a manner that shook the heavens themselves. Let us build this scene carefully, because it deserves that care. Because it happened, within the logic of this ancient narrative that human beings have been passing down for 3,000 years. Only once in the history of the universe, and nothing like it has happened before or since. Imagine Olympus on the day it happened. Imagine the mountain of the gods in what must have been an ordinary divine morning, or whatever passes for morning in a realm where the sun is not simply the sun, but the chariot of Helios racing across the sky. The gods were going about their divine business, whatever that consists of. Hera in conversation with someone, Poseidon thinking about the oceans, Hermes moving between realms on his winged sandals with messages and mischief, Ares in the restless, prowling state that was his natural condition, Hephaestus at his forge, the rhythmic sound of hammer on divine metal drifting across the mountain, Aphrodite existing beautifully, as was her function and her nature, Apollo tending to his arts, his music, his oracles, and Zeus on his throne, increasingly unable to pretend that everything was fine. The pain had been building. Perhaps it had been building for days by divine reckoning, or perhaps it came on suddenly. The sources vary here. But it had reached a point that no act of divine will could override or suppress. The king of the gods, the ruler of the universe, the most powerful being in existence, was incapacitated, unable to issue edicts or throw lightning bolts or do any of the things that constituted his ordinary existence, reduced to the simple, overwhelming, undeniable experience of pain so intense that it eclipsed everything else. The gods gathered around him with what we might charitably describe as concern, and perhaps somewhat less charitably as fascination. Even on Olympus, perhaps especially on Olympus, there was something inherently compelling about watching the most powerful being in existence brought low. His brothers and sisters, his divine children, the assembled company of Olympus stood around their king in various states of helpfulness and helplessness, because this was not something that any of them had encountered before, and there was no established protocol for it. It was at this point, according to the version of the myth that has come down to us most completely through ancient sources including Pindar, Hesiod, and later mythographers like Apollodorus, that a particular figure was summoned or arrived. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, the god of the forge, the master of making things with extraordinary precision and skill. In some versions, it is Prometheus who performs what comes next. The variations are interesting in themselves, that the act of releasing Athena is attributed to the gods most associated with craft, creation, and the making of things, as if her birth were itself a kind of making, a kind of forging of something new from materials already assembled. In the most widely accepted tradition, it is Hephaestus who steps forward, and he brings with him his axe, not a weapon of war, but a craftsman's tool, an instrument of precise, purposeful division. And with that axe, Hephaestus split open the head of Zeus. Let us sit with that image for a moment, because it is one of the most extraordinary images in all of world mythology, and it deserves to be seen clearly. The king of the gods, seated or perhaps fallen to one knee on his throne, in the grip of pain beyond anything he has experienced in his long divine existence. Around him, the assembled gods of Olympus watching in silence. And Hephaestus, limping, as he always limped, because of the old injury from when he was cast off Olympus in his infancy, raising his axe with the precise, confident hands of a master craftsman and bringing it down. The ancient sources tell us that the blow cleaved the skull of Zeus cleanly, that it opened him as a craftsman opens a difficult piece of stone to reveal what is hidden within, and that what happened next was immediate, fully formed, and utterly magnificent. Athena burst forth. She erupted from the head of Zeus fully grown, not as an infant but as a complete adult goddess, clothed in full armor, the breastplate, the helmet on her head, the long spear in her hand, the shield on her arm. She came out shouting a war cry that shook Olympus and reverberated across the entire universe. A sound that the ancient sources compare to the sound of 1,000 warriors on 1,000 battlefields all crying at once. A sound that made the sun, Helios in his chariot, pull his horses to a halt in pure astonishment, that made the sea surge and the earth tremble, that made every god on Olympus take an involuntary step backward from the sheer force of it. And then she stood there, Athena, for the first time in existence there in the golden light of Olympus, fully herself from the very first instant of her being. Let us think about what this means, that she was born fully formed, fully armed, fully adult, fully herself. In human experience, we associate birth with vulnerability, with smallness, with the absolute dependence of the new creature on those around it. We are born knowing almost nothing, capable of almost nothing, requiring years of patient nurturing before we can begin to approximate the beings we will eventually become. The process of becoming is long and slow, and involves a great deal of confusion and pain and gradual discovery. Athena had none of that. She arrived already knowing, already capable, already in possession of the full range of her gifts and qualities, already wearing the symbols and instruments of her divine function. This detail is not accidental. The ancient Greeks who shaped this myth over generations were making a specific statement about the nature of wisdom itself, that true wisdom, deep wisdom, the kind of wisdom that Athena embodied, is not something you acquire gradually through experience, though experience deepens it. It is something you either have or you do not, something that exists as a quality of being rather than a quantity of accumulated knowledge. Athena was born wise in the same way that a river is born flowing, not because she had learned to be wise, but because wisdom was the essential nature of what she was. She could not have been born any other way, any more than water could flow uphill, and she was born armed. This is the other crucial detail that demands our attention. Athena emerged from the head of Zeus in full battle armor, with her spear raised and her war cry sounding across creation. Why? Why does the goddess of wisdom arrive in the world as a warrior? The ancient Greeks understood war in a more complex way than we sometimes give them credit for. For them, there were essentially two kinds of war, and they were so different from each other as to be almost opposite things wearing the same name. There was the War of Ares, chaotic, blood-drunk, driven by rage and the desire for destruction, loving violence for its own sake, indifferent to outcomes and consequences, concerned only with the immediate ecstatic release of aggression. And there was the War of Athena, strategic, purposeful, conducted with intelligence and foresight, concerned not with destruction, but with resolution, not with the pleasure of violence, but with the achievement of specific, considered goals. Ares was war as a force of nature, like a flood or a fire. Athena was war as a human activity, subject to thought and planning and moral evaluation. The Greeks actually staged this distinction quite explicitly in myth and in their own self-understanding as a civilization. They valued Athena's kind of war, the war that thinks, that plans, that seeks the outcome rather than simply the fight. And they associated it with civilization itself, with the capacity of human beings to resolve conflicts not through pure force, but through the application of intelligence to force. Athena armed meant Athena ready to defend, to protect, to apply the full resources of her mind to the challenge of conflict. She was not aggressive. She was prepared. And there was one more thing visible in her armor, one more element that deserves particular attention: the aegis, the divine breastplate, decorated with the head of Medusa. But that belongs to later chapters and later stories. For now, what matters is simply the image of her standing there, in her armor, in the light of Olympus, having just arrived in the universe with the force of a thunderclap. The gods stared at her, and Zeus? Zeus looked at his daughter for the first time with eyes from which the pain had completely vanished, replaced by something that the ancient sources describe in different ways, but that feels, when you read them carefully, unmistakably like wonder. The king of the gods, who had been trying for so long to manage fate, to outsmart destiny, to prevent the catastrophe that had been prophesied, looked at what had been growing inside him all this time and saw something he had not anticipated. He had expected, perhaps, a rival. He had expected the first installment of his prophesied doom, the formidable daughter who would set in motion the chain of events that would eventually end his reign. He had feared her in the abstract before she existed. But what he saw when she stood before him was not his doom. What he saw was something that looked, in a profound and entirely unexpected way, like himself, not physically, but essentially. She had his energy, his force, his absolute refusal to be anything other than exactly what she was. She had Medus's wisdom and depth, but in her bearing and her presence, she was unmistakably also the child of Zeus. She had the quality of a ruler, but not the quality of a rival ruler. She had the quality of one who would stand beside him, not against him. Some scholars of ancient mythology have spent a great deal of thoughtful energy on this moment, on why the prophecy, which had been so specific and so terrifying, seemed to simply not apply to Athena in the way Zeus had feared. The son who would overthrow Zeus was indeed in the prophecy, and that story belongs to the distant future of Greek myth, involving other figures and other circumstances. But Athena, the daughter, the first child of Medus, was not his destroyer. She was, if anything, among his most loyal and devoted divine children. She championed his causes. She sat beside him in council. She fought for the order that he represented against the forces of chaos and dissolution. Why? The ancient Greeks offered several answers to this question, and all of them are interesting. One answer was simply that by swallowing Metis, Zeus had absorbed her wisdom so completely into himself that Athena, growing in that combined space, had emerged as a synthesis that transcended the opposition between father and child. She was not against Zeus because she was, in a meaningful sense, made of Zeus. She was his thought, his best self, the wisdom that his power needed to become truly just and truly civilized. Another answer was more structural and had to do with the nature of her birth. By being born from the head, the seat of reason and thought and decision-making, rather than from the womb, Athena was aligned with the rational, ordering principle of divine authority rather than with the biological succession that had brought down Uranus and Cronus. She was born from thought, and therefore she was thought, and thought cannot overthrow itself. Both of these answers are beautiful, and both of them point to the same underlying idea, that wisdom, when it is genuine and complete, is not opposed to power, but is power's natural completion. That a ruler who truly incorporates wisdom does not create an enemy in wisdom, but creates an ally. That Zeus, by swallowing Metis, had not defeated wisdom. He had married it to himself so thoroughly that their daughter was not the destroyer of his reign, but its highest expression. This is a political philosophy, as much as it is a myth. The ancient Greeks, who were in the process of inventing democracy and philosophy and systematic science all at roughly the same time, were using the figure of Athena and the story of her birth to make an argument about the right relationship between power and wisdom, between authority and intelligence. They were saying power without wisdom is Ares, destructive, chaotic, ultimately self-defeating. Power with wisdom is Athena, purposeful, just, civilization building, capable of enduring. They gave their greatest city her name. We will return to that gift and to the extraordinary contest by which she won the right to bestow it in chapters to come. But for now, let us stay with this first moment, this first standing of Athena in the light of Olympus, and let us rest in the image of it. The gods of Olympus were slowly recovering from the shock. The reverberations of her war cry were fading from the air. The seas were settling. The sun was moving again in his chariot across the sky, released from his astonished halt. Athena had lowered her spear. She was looking around her at the world she had just entered, at the assembled family of divine beings who were her relations by blood and circumstance, at the golden spaces of Olympus, at the vast blue expanse of sky and sea visible below the mountain, at the world that she would spend the rest of eternity helping to shape. And perhaps she was also, in some interior way that no one else could observe, aware of her mother, aware of Metis, still existing within Zeus, still thinking, still present in that transformed space that was simultaneously a captivity and a kind of apotheosis. Athena carried her mother within her in the same sense that every child carries the essential nature of their parents, not as a burden or a debt, but as a foundation, the ground on which everything else is built. She was Metis's wisdom made visible. She was what Metis had been moving toward all along, without knowing it. She was the practical intelligence of the universe given a face and a name and a war cry and a presence in the world. She was Athena, and the universe would never be quite the same. Outside on the slopes of Olympus, far below the gathering of the gods, the mortal world went on with its ordinary business. Farmers in their fields, fishermen on their boats, shepherds with their flocks on the hillsides, all of them unaware, or mostly unaware, of what had just happened above the clouds. But somewhere in that world, in the particular quality of the light that day, in the way the wind moved through the olive trees, in something indefinable in the air that made people look up from their work and feel, without knowing why, that something had changed. Somewhere in that world, the presence of Athena was already being felt. She had arrived, and now she would need to find her place in the divine order, to discover what her gifts were for, to learn what it meant to be the goddess of wisdom in a world that was still, in so many ways, learning what wisdom even was. That discovery would take her to extraordinary places, to the citadel of Athens and its founding contest, to the weaving room of a mortal woman who would dare to challenge her, to the fields of Troy where the greatest war in human memory would be fought, to the side of the greatest hero in all of ancient tradition. This is the hour that belongs to Athena, not because she is a goddess of darkness, and not because she is simply a goddess of the full light of reason, but because she lives in that space between, the space where thinking happens, where the mind moves through what it knows toward what it does not yet know, where wisdom works its patient way through complexity toward understanding, the space that is neither blind nor dazzled, the space of the gray hour, which is also, not coincidentally, the color of her eyes, gray eyes. This is one of the most consistent and most debated details in all of ancient Greek descriptions of Athena. The Greek word used is glaukopis, and this word has fascinated scholars for centuries because it resists simple translation. Glaukos could mean gray or blue-green, or the pale gleaming color of the sea in certain lights, or the color of olive leaves when the wind turns them and shows their silver undersides. It is a color word that contains within itself the qualities of brightness and depth simultaneously, a color that is not static but dynamic, that changes with the light, that is never quite the same twice. And opus means eyes, or gaze, or the quality of looking. So glaukopis Athena, the gray-eyed, or the bright-eyed, or the gleaming-gazed Athena, carries in her very epithet the suggestion of a particular quality of sight, penetrating, clear, deep, shifting, never simply one thing. Homer uses this epithet for her more than any other, returning to it again and again throughout the Iliad and the Odyssey with the rhythmic consistency of a musical phrase that anchors a symphony. Glaukopis Athena, bright-eyed Athena. Every time she appears in those great poems, which she does with extraordinary frequency, and always at crucial moments, she arrives carrying this quality of luminous, penetrating sight. She sees things that other gods do not see. She sees into situations and people and consequences with a depth that the more impulsive Olympians, Ares, Poseidon, even Zeus in his less considered moments, consistently fail to achieve. Her eyes are not simply physical features. They are descriptions of her fundamental nature. So let us spend this chapter learning to see Athena as the ancient Greeks saw her, not just as a figure in armor sprung from a divine skull, not just as a name on a temple or a statue in a museum, but as a living symbolic presence whose every attribute, every symbol, every associated animal and plant and object tells us something essential about what wisdom actually is and what it actually does in the world. Let us begin with the owl. Of all the creatures in the ancient world, the owl was Athena's most beloved and most famous symbol, so thoroughly associated with her that it became the symbol of Athens itself. Stamped on the coins that flowed through the ancient Mediterranean world, the little silver owl of Athens that was the most recognized currency of the ancient Greek world. Every Athenian coin, every drachma that changed hands in 1,000 ports and markets, carried on one side the face of Athena in her helmet, and on the other side, her owl, a small, precise, beautifully rendered little bird that looked out at the world with enormous knowing eyes. Why the owl? The answer seems obvious at first. Owls are wise, everyone knows that. But that answer is almost entirely backwards, historically speaking. We associate owls with wisdom largely because the ancient Greeks associated them with Athena and associated Athena with wisdom. The owl came first, and it brought its qualities with it. So what qualities does the owl actually have that made it the perfect embodiment of Athena's particular kind of wisdom? The owl sees in darkness. This is the beginning of everything. When every other creature is navigating by the light of the sun, the owl is the creature that can pierce through darkness and see clearly what is hidden from others. It has enormous eyes, disproportionately large relative to its skull, forward-facing like human eyes, but vastly more sensitive, capable of gathering light at levels that render the darkest night as navigable as a gray afternoon. The owl does not wait for the sun to illuminate what it needs to see. It carries, in the structure of its own eyes, the capacity to see in conditions that blind everything else. This is Athena's wisdom. Not the wisdom that operates only in well-lit situations, only when all the information is available and clearly laid out, only when the problem is straightforward and the solution obvious. But the wisdom that functions in darkness, in uncertainty, in the situations where the information is incomplete and the way forward is not clear and most people are effectively blind. The wisdom that can look at a situation in which everyone else sees only confusion and find within it the essential structure, the actual shape of what is happening, the real nature of the problem, and therefore the real possibility of its solution. The little owl of Athena, Athena noctua in the scientific taxonomy, named directly for the goddess, was extraordinarily common in ancient Athens. It nested in the rocky outcroppings of the Acropolis itself, in the cliffs beneath the great temple. The Athenians heard owl calls in the night and understood them as a presence, as the voice of their patron goddess moving through the darkness above their city. When the Athenian fleet gathered before a great naval battle, as it did before the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, one of the most consequential battles in Western history, an owl was seen flying over the fleet, and the soldiers understood this as Athena's blessing, as her gray-eyed gaze falling on them in the darkness before dawn, as her promise that clear sight and strategic wisdom would be with them in the hours to come. They won that battle. Against an enemy fleet many times their size, in a narrow strait where Persian numbers could not be effectively deployed, using a strategy of extraordinary sophistication that turned the very advantages of the Persian fleet into liabilities. It was exactly the kind of victory that belonged to Athena, won not by overwhelming force but by superior thinking. But the owl is only the beginning. Let us move to the olive tree. If the owl is the symbol of how Athena sees, the olive tree is the symbol of what she gives. And the story of how the olive tree became hers is itself one of the most beautiful stories in Greek mythology, a story that we will explore in much greater detail in the chapter dedicated to the founding of Athens, but which deserves at least an introduction here, because without understanding the olive, you cannot fully understand Athena's relationship to civilization and to the lives of ordinary human beings. The olive tree, in the ancient Mediterranean world, was not simply a tree. It was an entire civilization in botanical form. The olive provided food, its fruit eaten fresh or preserved, dense with nutrition, capable of sustaining a person through conditions that would defeat other food sources. It provided oil, pressed from its fruit in processes that the ancient world refined to extraordinary efficiency. Oil that was simultaneously cooking medium and lamp fuel, and skin conditioner, and ritual offering, and commercial commodity and medicine. The olive lamp was how the ancient world pushed back against darkness, how it extended the productive hours of the day, how it allowed learning and craft and thought to continue after the sun had set. You could say, without exaggeration, that the olive lamp was one of the primary tools by which ancient civilization thought its thoughts, and the olive tree itself was virtually immortal. Ancient olive trees do not simply die when they become old. They hollow out, they split, they appear from the outside to be entirely dead, and yet they continue producing fruit for centuries, for millennia. The oldest living olive trees in Greece today are estimated to be 3,000 years old. There are olive trees still bearing fruit in the Mediterranean world that were alive when Homer was composing his poems. They are expressions of patient, enduring, renewable productivity. They give and give and give across timescales that make human lifetimes look like brief passing moments. Athena gave the olive tree to Athens. She planted it on the Acropolis during the great contest between herself and Poseidon for the patronage of the city. Poseidon struck the rock with his trident and produced a saltwater spring. Dramatic, impressive, a display of raw divine power. Athena pressed her spear to the rock, and from that point grew the first olive tree. The Athenians, judging between these two gifts, chose the olive. They chose the gift that was useful over the gift that was spectacular. They chose the gift that sustained life over the gift that displayed power. In doing so, they chose Athena. And in choosing Athena, they chose a particular vision of what a city, what a civilization, what a human community could be. This choice, the choice of the olive over the salt spring, is one of the most quietly radical moments in ancient mythology, because it is a moment in which a community collectively decides what it values most, and what it values most is not power or spectacle or divine favor displayed in impressive natural phenomena. What it values most is the thing that will actually help it live, grow, think, and endure. The olive oil that filled Athenian lamps was the same olive oil that lit the libraries where Athenian philosophy developed. The same trees that fed Athenian bodies provided the wood for Athenian ships, which carried Athenian trade and Athenian ideas across the ancient world. The olive gift was not just agriculture. It was civilization itself, offered in botanical form by a goddess who understood that the greatest gift you can give a community is not a demonstration of power, but the means of their own self-sustaining growth. The ancient Athenians understood this. They tended the olive trees on the Acropolis with religious devotion, and when the Persian army under Xerxes burned the Acropolis to the ground in 480 BCE, the same year as the Battle of Salamis, one of the things that most concerned the Athenians was the fate of the sacred olive tree of Athena, the original tree she had planted in the founding contest. When they returned to their burned city after the Persian defeat, they found that the olive tree had already sent up a new shoot from its blackened stump, a single day's growth. Alive again, already, renewed from its own roots. They took this as a sign of Athena's continuing presence, of her promise that what had been destroyed could grow again. That wisdom and civilization, however completely they may seem to be consumed by fire and violence, carry within themselves the same capacity for renewal that lives in the root systems of olive trees. Now let us speak of the spear and the shield, her weapons, because they too are symbols that carry meaning far beyond their military function. The spear of Athena is not the indiscriminate weapon of a war god. It is the directed, purposeful extension of her will, an instrument of precision. When Athena uses her spear in mythology, she uses it surgically to achieve specific outcomes, not to participate in the general chaos of battle for the pleasure of violence. She appears on battlefields not to fight for fighting's sake, but to protect particular individuals, to turn the tide of particular engagements at particular moments, to ensure that specific consequences that she has judged to be correct are brought into being. Her spear is thinking made physical, the same quality that makes her mind penetrating and precise made visible in the instrument she carries. The shield, the aegis, is perhaps the most complex of her symbols. Originally, the aegis was described as a divine breastplate or cloak rather than a shield proper, sometimes attributed to Zeus himself, who would loan it to Athena for particular purposes, and sometimes described as her own. It was made, in some versions, from the skin of a divine goat, and it created, when shaken, the sound of thunder and a terror that routed enemies before a single blow could be struck. Later traditions added to the aegis the head of Medusa, the Gorgon, whose gaze turned men to stone, set at its center as the most terrible possible weapon of defensive intimidation. We will encounter the Medusa story in full when we come to it, because it is intimately connected to Athena's mythology and to one of the most misunderstood of all the ancient stories. But for now, what matters about the aegis is its fundamental quality. It is a defensive weapon, a protective weapon, something that preserves and guards rather than attacks and destroys. Athena goes into conflict armored, shielded, prepared to absorb and deflect rather than simply to strike. This is consistent with everything we know about her. She is reactive rather than aggressive, strategic rather than impulsive, concerned with protection and preservation rather than conquest. Consider how different this makes her from Ares, and how much that difference meant to the ancient Greeks. Ares loved war. He was war as appetite, war as sensation, war as the most direct and intoxicating form of feeling alive. He threw himself into battle with abandon, without plan, without concern for outcome, and was frequently wounded as a result. There are multiple episodes in the Iliad in which Ares is hurt in battle and retreats to Olympus wailing. He is not a dignified figure. He is a figure of tremendous energy and very little wisdom, which is exactly the Greeks' point about unthinking aggression. Athena, by contrast, was rarely wounded, rarely caught off guard, rarely on the losing side of any conflict she chose to enter. She entered battles she had already won in her mind before the first blow was struck. And then there is the most intimate of her symbols, the one that connects all the others and speaks most directly to her essential nature, the distaff and the loom. Athena was the goddess of weaving. Of all the crafts she patronized, and she patronized many, being the goddess of all skilled work with the hands, all techne in the Greek sense, all the applied intelligence that transforms raw materials into useful and beautiful things. Weaving was the most specifically and personally hers. She wove her own garments. She taught mortals the art of weaving. She competed with a mortal weaver named Arachne in a contest that ended in one of the most complex moral episodes in all of her mythology. And she was associated with the loom in a way that was not merely symbolic but cosmological, because the ancient Greeks understood the universe itself as a kind of weaving, the threads of fate woven together by the fates, the Moirai, into the tapestry of events that constituted the history of the world. What does it mean that the goddess of wisdom is also the goddess of weaving? Think about what weaving actually involves as a cognitive activity. You are holding in your mind simultaneously the pattern you intend to create and the current state of the threads before you, tracking the progress of dozens or hundreds of individual threads, each one maintaining its own position and tension in relation to all the others, each one mattering not in isolation, but entirely in terms of its relationship to everything around it. You are thinking in patterns, in structures, in the complex interdependencies of elements that only become meaningful when understood in their connections to each other. You are creating something that is more than the sum of its parts. A cloth that is not simply a collection of threads, but a structure that has properties that none of the individual threads possess alone. Warmth, strength, the capacity to bear a pattern. This is exactly how Athena's wisdom works. She thinks in patterns. She sees not individual elements in isolation, but the structure of their connections, the shape of their relationships, the way that things that seem separate are actually part of the same weaving. When she helps Odysseus in the Odyssey, and she is his constant companion and protector throughout that long, complicated journey, she does not help him by solving each individual problem as it arises. She helps him by understanding the entire pattern of his situation, by seeing the shape of the whole, and therefore knowing how each particular thread should be managed to contribute to the complete design. She is the strategist who keeps the final picture in mind while managing the immediate details, the weaver who never loses sight of the pattern, even when working on a single thread. The loom also connects her to the feminine traditions of the ancient world in ways that are worth dwelling on. Athena was a virgin goddess, one of three, along with Artemis and Hestia, which meant that she stood apart from the cycles of desire and reproduction that governed the lives of the other Olympian goddesses. She was not defined by her relationships with male gods, not shaped by love affairs and jealousies and the dramas of divine romance. She was defined by her work, by her craft, by the things she made, and the people she helped, and the city she protected. In this sense, she was a radical figure in the ancient imagination, a female deity of supreme power whose power was entirely independent of her sexuality or her reproductive function, whose greatness was entirely a function of what she knew and what she could do. This made her beloved by women in the ancient world, particularly women who worked, the weavers, the potters, the crafts, women whose skilled hands produced the material culture of ancient civilization. Athena was their goddess, not because she was soft or comforting or maternal in the conventional sense, but because she valued what they did. She had done it herself. She took seriously the intelligence and the skill that went into making things well, and she understood that the woman at her loom, producing cloth of extraordinary beauty and utility, was engaged in an act of the same essential quality as the philosopher in his school or the general at his strategy table. All of them were applying intelligence to the transformation of reality. All of them were doing Athena's work. One more symbol demands our attention before we close this chapter: the city itself. Athens. We have already glimpsed the founding contest, the competition with Poseidon for patronage of the greatest city in Greece, and we will return to it in full. But it is worth noting here that the very idea of a city was, for the ancient Greeks, an Athena idea. The polis, the city-state, was not simply a collection of buildings and people. It was a form of organized human intelligence, a way of structuring collective life so that it produced more than the sum of its individual members. A city had laws, and laws were the application of wisdom to the problem of how people can live together without destroying each other. A city had institutions, and institutions were the accumulated practical intelligence of generations, encoded into structures that could outlast any individual. A city had shared culture, shared memory, shared identity, a collective mind that thought thoughts that no individual could think alone. All of this was Athena's alone. All of this was Athena's domain. She was the goddess of the polis, not just as patron, but as its essential principle, the intelligence that held it together, that made it more than a mob, that allowed it to function as a thinking, purposeful entity, rather than a collection of competing individuals. When the Athenians built the Parthenon, that extraordinary temple on the Acropolis, one of the most perfect buildings ever constructed by human beings, whose ruins still stand after 2.5 millennia of wars, earthquakes, explosions, and neglect. They were not simply honoring their patron goddess. They were making a statement about what they believed their city was, about what principle they believed organized and elevated their collective life. They were saying, "We are the city of wisdom. We are the people who chose the olive tree. We are the ones who, when given the choice between power and intelligence, chose intelligence." Whether they always lived up to that aspiration is another question, and history gives a complicated answer. But the aspiration itself, the idea that a great city could be built on the principle of wisdom, that the intelligence of the goddess who sprang fully formed from the head of the king of the gods could be the animating spirit of a human community, that idea has never entirely left the world. It traveled from Athens through the writings of Plato and Aristotle, and Thucydides and Sophocles, and all the other extraordinary minds that flourished in the shadow of the Parthenon, and it has been shaping human thinking about cities and laws and civilization ever since. Athena, then, as we let the image of her settle into the quiet interior space where this story has been unfolding, is not simply a character in an ancient story. She is a map of something, a map of what human intelligence looks like when it is functioning at its best, when it is applied with full seriousness and full ethical weight to the problems of how to live, how to make, how to fight only when necessary, and then strategically, how to build communities that can endure, how to see in the dark. The owl sits on her shoulder and turns its enormous eyes toward the darkness, seeing clearly what is hidden from others. The olive tree grows patient and immortal from the rocky soil of the Acropolis, giving its oil for lamps, giving its fruit for sustenance, giving its wood for ships that carry ideas across the world. The loom sits still, and the pattern of the cloth carries more meaning in its structure than any single thread could contain. And her eyes, gray, gleaming, penetrating, the color of the sea in the last hour before dawn, the color of the olive leaves when the wind shows their silver undersides. Her eyes look at the world with a clarity that is neither blind nor dazzled. Outside the window, if you have one, the night is at whatever stage the night is at in your particular corner of the world. Perhaps it is deepest darkness, or perhaps the sky is beginning to move toward that gray transitional hour that belongs to her. Either way, somewhere above the light pollution and the clouds, the stars are moving in their ancient patterns. The owl, if there is one near you, is still awake, still hunting, still piercing the darkness with its extraordinary eyes. And somewhere in the deep background of everything you know, everything you have built, every moment in which you have looked at a complicated situation and found your way through it by thinking rather than by force, by patience rather than by panic, by the careful weighing of consequences rather than the blind following of impulse. In all of those moments, something of Athena was present. not as a supernatural force, but as a quality of mind that the ancient Greeks understood so well that they gave it a face and a name and a city and a pair of gray eyes that could see in the dark. There is a particular quality to the light on the Acropolis in the early morning that has nothing to do with mythology and everything to do with geology. The rock itself, that great upthrust of limestone that dominates the Attic plain the way a thought dominates a conversation, suddenly, inevitably, as if it were always going to be there. The rock catches the morning light in a way that makes it glow from within, as if the stone were not merely reflecting sunlight but generating its own pale golden radiance from somewhere deep inside its ancient structure. People who have stood on that rock at dawn and watched the light come describe it in terms that are almost always spiritual, almost always involving the word sacred, even when spoken by people who have no particular interest in the sacred. Something about that specific combination of stone and light and elevation and the vast plain spreading in every direction below creates a quality of experience that resists ordinary description. This is where our story takes place. On this rock, before the temples were built, before the city existed in any form that we would recognize as a city, before there was a name for the place or the people who would come to live in it, a time so early that the world was still being shaped by the active decisions of gods, when the boundaries between the divine and the mortal were not yet fixed, when the question of which supernatural power would preside over which piece of the earth was still genuinely open, still a matter of contest and negotiation, and the exercise of divine will in competition with other divine will. Two gods are coming to this rock. They have been summoned, or they have summoned themselves. The distinction is not always clear in the earliest mythological time, when the rules of divine behavior were still being established through the precedents that individual divine actions created. They are coming because this particular piece of rock on this particular plain surrounded by these particular hills and this particular silver sea has been noticed, has been identified as significant, has been recognized as the kind of place where something important is going to happen, where a human community is going to root itself and grow, and where the question of which divine principle will shape that community's character matters enormously, not just for the people who will live there, but for the gods themselves, for what it means about the nature of the world that one kind of divine power, rather than another kind, will be the animating spirit of this particular place. The gods coming to the rock are Poseidon and Athena. Let us take a moment to understand who these two are before they meet on the limestone heights, because the contest between them is not merely a story about which gift was more practical. It is a story about two fundamentally different visions of what power is, what it is for, and what kind of power deserves to be at the center of human civilization. Poseidon, the god of the sea, of earthquakes, of horses, of the deep places of the earth where unimaginable pressures create the trembling that brings walls and mountains down. He is Zeus's brother, one of the original 3 sons of Kronos, who divided the world between them when the Titans were defeated, Zeus taking the sky, Hades taking the underworld, Poseidon taking the sea and everything beneath the surface of the solid earth. He is not a minor deity. He is not a peripheral figure in the divine hierarchy. He is one of the 3 great powers of the world, and his domain is vast and ancient and terrifying and necessary. Without the sea, there is no trade, no rain, no fish, no life. Without the pressure and movement of the earth beneath the surface, there is no geological formation, no soil, no mountain, no valley. Poseidon is not simply the god of water. He is the god of the fundamental physical forces that shape the world's surface. the deep energies that move beneath everything we stand on and sail across. He is also, in his character as the mythology portrays him, proud. Enormously, magnificently, sometimes catastrophically proud. He does not accept being second. He does not accept being overlooked. When Zeus divided the world and Poseidon received the sea, he accepted this, but he did not stop wanting more. And throughout Greek mythology, he is consistently a figure who pushes at the boundaries of his domain, who contests divine decisions that he believes undervalue him, who nurses grievances with the patient intensity of deep water moving slowly but with irresistible force. His relationship with Athens specifically was one of those ongoing divine tensions, a resentment that persisted through the mythology, surfacing in unexpected moments, in his relationship with Athenian heroes, in the way he tested and challenged the city that had chosen another god over him. He arrived at the Acropolis first, in some versions of the story. The first to claim, the first to stand on the high rock and look out over the surrounding land and see and understand what was at stake. He arrived in his full divine manifestation, the earth trembling slightly beneath his feet in recognition of his presence, the sea visible in the distance stirring as if aware that its god had come ashore. He was vast and dark and magnificent, his hair the color of storm water, his trident a weapon and a symbol simultaneously, the three-pronged instrument that could split rock, raise waves, trigger the deep underground movements that shook the earth. And Athena. She came as she always came, with purpose, with preparation, with the full intelligence of her strategic mind already at work on the problem before her. She had considered this contest. She had thought about it from multiple directions, approached it the way a general approaches a battlefield she has studied on maps before she has seen it with her own eyes. She knew Poseidon's nature, and she knew her own. She knew what he was likely to offer, and she had thought carefully about what she would offer in response. She did not come to the Acropolis hoping for inspiration. She came knowing what she was going to do. This difference, Poseidon's magnificent spontaneity versus Athena's careful preparation, is itself part of the meaning of the contest. It is not just about the gifts they give. It is about the nature of the givers, the way they approach the problem of demonstrating their value to a human community, the quality of thinking they bring to the question of what human beings actually need. The people of the settlement, let us call them Proto-Athenians, the founding community that would become one of the most consequential cities in human history, had gathered to witness. In some versions of the myth, there is a formal court, a jury of gods or of the original Athenian inhabitants themselves who will judge between the two divine offerings. In other versions, the judgment is simpler and more immediate. The people themselves will choose, will look at what has been offered to them, and decide which gift better represents what they want their community to be built upon. Either way, the structure of the story is the same. Two gods offer their best, and a choice is made that will shape the identity of a city for 3,000 years. Poseidon went first. He raised his trident, that three-pronged instrument of divine geological power, and he struck the rock of the Acropolis with it. The blow was decisive, authoritative, the action of a god who is completely confident in the power he possesses. The rock split, and from the split, from the wound the trident made in the ancient limestone, water burst forth. A spring, fresh from the earth, bubbling up through the crack in the rock with the spontaneous vitality of natural forces unleashed. Except not entirely fresh. When the witnesses came forward and tasted the water, when they cupped it in their hands and brought it to their lips, they found that it was salt, seawater. The gift of Poseidon was a saltwater spring on the Acropolis, the sea brought inland, the deep briny water of his domain pushing up through the rock to the surface. Now stop for a moment and consider this gift honestly before the interpretations settle over it like sediment. A saltwater spring on the Acropolis was not nothing. It was a remarkable and genuinely powerful thing. Salt was valuable, extraordinarily valuable in the ancient world, a preservative, a necessity, something that armies and empires were organized around acquiring. The sea connection was valuable, trade, naval power, the possibility of reaching every other civilization in the Mediterranean through the water highway that Poseidon controlled, and the sheer drama of the gift. The trident blow, the rock splitting, the water erupting from stone, was a display of raw divine power that announced clearly, this is a God who can do things. This is a God who can strike the earth and make it yield. If you want protection, if you want a patron who will demonstrate his power in ways that your enemies cannot mistake, this is the God for you. Poseidon's gift was a statement of divine authority, a demonstration of what he could do, of the scale of his power, of the fact that even the rock of the earth was subject to his will. It was the gift of a God who understood power as the capacity to impose your will on the physical world, and who assumed that this was what human communities most needed from their divine patron, the assurance of overwhelming force at their disposal. Now, Athena. She stepped forward, and in the quiet that followed Poseidon's dramatic display, in the space of transition between his action and hers, there was a moment, a pause in which everything was possible, in which the contest had not yet been decided, in which the people gathered on the rock were still absorbing what they had seen and not yet ready to choose. She pressed her spear to the rock, not struck, pressed. The motion was deliberate and precise rather than powerful and dramatic. She was not trying to split the rock. She was not demonstrating the ability to impose her will through force. She was doing something much quieter and in its own way much more extraordinary. She was asking the earth to offer something of its own rather than demanding that it yield to hers. From the point where her spear touched the limestone, something grew. Not water, not a display of geological or hydraulic power. A tree. Small at first, as all trees are small at first, but growing with a divine speed that compressed years into moments, rising from the rock in front of the watching crowd, putting out branches, producing leaves, silver green, catching the attic light with their characteristic shimmer, rustling in the breeze that always moves across the high rock, and then, almost immediately, fruit. Small, hard, green-black olives appearing on the branches like punctuation marks in a sentence, like the specific, precise details that transform a general statement into an actual fact. An olive tree, growing from bare limestone rock on the highest point of the city that was not yet a city. The silence that followed was different from the silence that had followed Poseidon's demonstration. Poseidon's silence was the silence of awe, the immediate visceral response to an overwhelming display of power. Athena's silence was the silence of recognition, the slower, deeper response that comes when something reveals itself to be exactly what you needed without your having known, until this moment that you needed it. The people looked at the olive tree, and they began to understand what they were looking at. An olive tree gives food. Its fruit is dense with oil, with the specific fatty nutrition that sustains human bodies through conditions that defeat other food sources. You can live on olives. People have, through famines and sieges and the various catastrophes that ancient history regularly visited upon human settlements. The olive is not a luxury. It is a foundational food, a survival food, a food that asks almost nothing of the land it grows in. It will grow in rocky, poor soil where almost nothing else will grow. It will survive drought. It will produce year after year for centuries without the intensive cultivation that grain requires. An olive tree gives oil. The oil pressed from its fruit is everything. Cooking medium, lamp fuel, skin protector against sun and cold, and the drying effects of sea wind, offering to the gods, medium of athletic training. Greek athletes covered themselves in olive oil before competition, preservative for food and leather and wood, lubricant for machinery, base for medicines and perfumes. Olive oil was the petroleum of the ancient world, the single substance that powered more aspects of daily life than any other, the resource whose abundance or scarcity determined whether a household, a city, a civilization thrived or merely survived. An olive tree gives light. This is perhaps the most profound of its gifts, the one that connects most directly to Athena's essential nature. The oil that fills the lamp is what allows human beings to extend the productive hours of their existence beyond the boundaries set by the sun. By the light of olive oil lamps, the ancient world thought its thoughts, wrote its texts, made its art, conducted its conversations, educated its children. The intellectual life of the ancient world, the philosophy, the mathematics, the medicine, the history, the poetry, was conducted largely in the light of olive oil. Athena gave Athens the lamp. She gave them the means of continuing to think after the sun went down. She gave them the extension of the gray hour, the hour between darkness and light, indefinitely into the actual darkness. And an olive tree is immortal. This is the quality that would become most visible in the crisis that was still centuries away when Athena planted her tree on the Acropolis, but which was already, on some level, understood. The olive does not simply die when it is damaged or burned or cut. It renews itself from its own root system with a persistence that seems almost willful, almost personal, as if the tree itself has decided to continue and nothing external can override that decision. To give an olive tree to a city is to give that city a symbol of its own possible permanence, its own capacity to renew itself from its own roots even after destruction, to persist through what would kill other things, to be still alive and still bearing fruit when the things that burned it are themselves long gone and forgotten. Poseidon's gift was power. Athena's gift was life. Specifically, the particular kind of life that sustains civilization, the food that feeds it, the oil that lights it, the lamp that allows it to think in the dark, the immortal rootedness that allows it to endure. The people chose. This moment of choosing deserves to be held in the imagination for a while, because it is not self-evident that they made the right choice, and the ancient Greeks themselves knew this. Poseidon was dangerous, a god who was refused, a god who competed and lost, a god whose gift was judged insufficient. This was a god who would remember. And Poseidon did remember. He did not accept the decision quietly. He struck the plain of Thria with his trident in his anger, and flooded it with seawater in his rage, and nursed his resentment with the patient cold persistence of the deep sea, keeping its temperature constant through the seasons. He would make his displeasure felt in the mythology of Athens for generations, in storms that troubled Athenian ships, in his support for Athens's enemies, in the way he tested Athenian heroes with particular severity. But the people chose the olive tree. And in making that choice, they were saying something that went beyond simply preferring one gift over another. They were choosing a particular vision of what their city would be and what it would be for. They were saying that they wanted to be the city of the olive and the lamp, the city that sustains and illuminates, the city built on the intelligence that produces useful things rather than the power that demonstrates its force through destruction. They were choosing to be Athena's people. And in being Athena's people, they were committing themselves to a particular aspiration, a particular idea of human excellence that would shape everything the city produced for the next several centuries. They named the city Athens. They named it for the goddess who gave them the tree. What happened next was the kind of institutional act that turns a moment of divine intervention into a living tradition. The Athenians built a temple on the Acropolis, and then another and another, each one more magnificent than the last, each one an attempt to adequately express the gratitude and the devotion and the aspiration that the city felt toward its patron. The Erechtheion, one of the most beautiful buildings ever constructed, was built directly over the spot where the contest had taken place, incorporating within its sacred precincts both the mark of Poseidon's trident in the rock and the sacred olive tree of Athena, that same tree, or its lineal descendant, growing in its sacred enclosure as it had grown since the beginning of the city. The building was a monument to the choice, to the moment of choosing, to the meaning that the choice had made available to the people who made it, and the Parthenon. We must speak of the Parthenon, even briefly, because it is the most complete expression in architectural form of everything Athena meant to the city that chose her. Built in the 5th century BCE, at the height of Athenian power and creativity, designed by architects of extraordinary sophistication, Iktinos and Callicrates, working under the artistic direction of Pheidias, who created the statue of Athena that stood within it. The Parthenon is a building that rewards attention the way a great poem rewards attention, revealing more of its intelligence and intention the more carefully you look. Every proportion of the Parthenon is mathematically determined and subtly adjusted to correct for optical distortions that would make a purely mathematical building look wrong to the human eye. The columns are not straight cylinders, they bulge slightly in the middle, a refinement called entasis, to prevent them from looking as if they are pinched or thinner than they should be at their centers. The floor is not perfectly flat. It curves upward slightly in all directions to prevent it from looking as if it sags. The columns lean very slightly inward, so that if they were extended upward to infinity, they would meet at a point miles above the building, creating a subliminal impression of convergence and stability. None of these refinements are visible. None of them are things that an ordinary visitor to the Parthenon could point to and name. They work entirely below the threshold of conscious perception, creating an experience of rightness and beauty and proportion that the viewer feels without knowing why. This is the architecture of wisdom, not the architecture of power, which announces itself through size and force and the explicit demonstration of capability, but the architecture of intelligence, which works invisibly, which achieves its effects through the accumulated application of thought to every detail, which is most itself in the refinements that nobody notices but everyone feels. It is, in this sense, a perfect physical embodiment of Athena's nature. A building that is exactly what wisdom looks like when it is given form. Inside the Parthenon stood the great statue of Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin, created by Pheidias, one of the greatest sculptors of the ancient world, over the course of more than a decade, using chryselephantine technique, a wooden core covered in gold for the drapery and carved ivory for the skin, with inset eyes of precious stone. She stood 12 meters tall, nearly 40 feet, inside the relatively intimate space of the temple's interior, which would have made her overwhelming presence fill the entire building. She carried in her outstretched hand a smaller figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, as if casually offering victory to anyone who approached. On her chest was the aegis with the Gorgon's face. On her helmet was a sphinx and 2 griffins. At her feet, her shield, its surface carved with the battle of the Athenians and Amazons, the battle of the gods and giants, the birth of Pandora. In her very body, the entire mythology and meaning of Athens was encoded. The statue does not survive. Not a single fragment of it remains. We know it only through descriptions in ancient texts and through much smaller copies made in later centuries, reduced and simplified versions that give only the faintest impression of what Phidias created in that interior space. But the descriptions are consistent enough and the copies numerous enough to build a mental image of what it must have been like to enter the Parthenon and find her there. That immense golden and ivory figure in the relative dimness of the interior, lit by the light entering through the doorway and perhaps reflected up from a pool of water or oil in the floor. Her eyes luminous, her spear extending toward the ceiling, her expression, all the ancient sources agree on this. Her expression of absolute serenity, absolute composure, the expression of a being who has seen everything and understood it and is completely at peace with what she has seen and understood. This is what the Athenians were worshipping when they worshipped Athena. Not a divine tyrant who demanded submission, not a supernatural power who required appeasement through sacrifice, but an ideal, the ideal of the mind working at its fullest capacity, the ideal of intelligence applied with full ethical seriousness to the problems of existence, the ideal of wisdom as the highest form of human and divine achievement. They built the most perfect building they could build, and inside it they placed the most complete image they could create of the principle they believed most worth aspiring to. And then they went out into the world and tried, with varying success, to be worthy of what they had built. The contest on the Acropolis then, the trident and the olive tree, Poseidon's salt spring and Athena's immortal gift, was not simply a story about which god was more generous or which gift more useful. It was a story about a choice that a community makes at its founding moment, a choice about what it believes is most worth having, most worth building a life around, most worth the complex labor and ongoing struggle of creating and maintaining a civilization. The choice was wisdom over power, the lamp over the weapon, the gift that sustains and illuminates over the gift that impresses and intimidates, the patient immortal tree over the dramatic but brackish spring, the gray-eyed goddess over the god of earthquakes and storms. It was a remarkable choice, a choice so extraordinary that it defined a city for 3 millennia, and through that city shaped the entire intellectual tradition of the Western world. A choice that created the conditions in which Socrates would walk through the agora asking impossible questions, in which Plato would write dialogues that are still read and argued over 2,500 years later, in which Aristotle would systematize human knowledge in ways that shaped every subsequent attempt to understand the world. A choice that created the conditions for the theater of Sophocles and Euripides, the architecture of the Parthenon and the Erechtheion, the democratic experiment that, however imperfectly it was realized in its original form, would become the foundational political ideal of the modern world. All of it, in some sense, began on that rock, when Athena pressed her spear to the ancient limestone and an olive tree grew from the stone. When the people gathered on the Acropolis looked at what had been offered to them, the salt spring on one side, the olive tree on the other, raw power on one side, patient wisdom on the other, and made their choice and kept it. Outside, if the night has progressed far enough, The sky may be doing that thing it does in the hour before dawn, that subtle transformation of quality, the shapes of things asserting themselves before the light arrives to confirm them. The olive tree in your imagination, if you have placed one there during this story, will be doing what olive trees do in every quality of light, shifting the orientation of its leaves so that first one side and then the other catches the changing sky, silver and green and silver again, infinitely patient, rooted in rock, asking very little and giving an enormous amount to anyone willing to pay attention. This is Athena's city. This is what she gave them. This is what they chose. The next chapter will take us into a different kind of story, darker and more complicated, the story of wisdom meeting its shadow, of intelligence encountering its own limits in the form of pride and punishment, and the complicated justice of the gods. Her name was Arachne. She could weave, and she was not afraid of anything, including the goddess. There is a particular kind of pride that is different from arrogance. Arrogance is easy to identify and easy to dismiss. It is the pride of someone who believes they are better than they are, whose self-assessment has lost contact with reality, whose confidence has outrun their actual capability. We recognize arrogance quickly, and we are rarely troubled by its punishment, because the punishment is almost always simply the revelation of the truth that arrogance was concealing. But the pride we are about to encounter is more complicated and more interesting and, in certain lights, more sympathetic than arrogance. It is the pride of someone who is exactly as good as they believe themselves to be. Someone whose self-assessment is not inflated, but accurate, scrupulously, honestly, demonstrably accurate. Someone who can do the thing they claim to be able to do as well as they claim to be able to do it, and who has the evidence of their own hands and the testimony of everyone who has ever watched them work to support every word of what they say about themselves. This is the pride that the Greeks called hubris, and it is more philosophically troubling than ordinary arrogance precisely because it cannot be defeated by simply revealing the truth. The truth, in cases of genuine hubris, supports the proud person's claim. They are that good. The problem is not their assessment of their ability. The problem is something else, something about the relationship between human excellence and divine order, something about what it means to be mortal and brilliant simultaneously, something about the boundaries that even the most genuinely gifted human being is expected to observe. Her name was Arachne. She was a young woman from Hypaipa, a small city in the region of Lydia in what is now Western Turkey. Her father, Idmon, was a dyer of purple, a craftsman of some skill and presumably some prosperity, since purple dye was expensive and its production required both technical knowledge and access to the murex shellfish from which the color was extracted. She grew up surrounded by color and thread and the specific knowledge of how to transform raw materials into the stuff from which beauty is made. She learned to weave the way some people learn to breathe, not as an acquired skill, but as the natural extension of what she already was, her hands finding the pattern in the threads the way a musician finds melody, discovering something that was waiting for her rather than constructing something entirely new. And she was extraordinary. This is not a story about a deluded girl who believed herself better than she was. The sources are consistent. Arachne could weave in ways that nobody else could weave. The cloth that came from her loom was not merely excellent, it was revelatory. It showed people something about what cloth could be that they had not previously imagined. It achieved effects with thread and tension and color that other weavers watched with the specific combination of admiration and incomprehension that genuinely superior technique always produces in those who love the craft but cannot match the master. People came from considerable distances to watch her work. They stood around her loom the way later generations would stand around painters or sculptors, watching the hands move and trying to understand how those particular movements produced those particular results. They would say, watching her, and this is where the story begins to gather its dark weather, they would say that she must have been taught by Athena, that no merely human acquisition of skill could account for what they were seeing, that the goddess of weaving and craft herself must have taken a special interest in this girl from Hypeipa, must have guided her hands in some way, must have shared some portion of her divine technical knowledge in the particular way that divine patrons sometimes did with their most gifted mortal devotees. Arachne heard this, and she disagreed. She disagreed not loudly, not rudely, not with the theatrical defiance of someone performing rebellion for an audience. She disagreed simply and directly, with the specific confidence of someone who knows exactly how much work has gone into what she does, and resents the implication that the work alone could not account for the result. She had not been taught by Athena. She had taught herself. Years of practice, years of failure and adjustment and renewed attempt, years of pushing at the boundaries of what thread and tension and pattern could do. This was the source of her ability. Not divine intervention, not the borrowed grace of a goddess. Her own hands, her own eyes, her own intelligence applied relentlessly to the specific problem of making cloth that was also beauty. She would weave against Athena herself, she said. If the goddess wanted to contest the matter, let her come and compete, and let whoever judged the result judge honestly what they saw. She did not say this in the heat of anger. She said it as a statement of fact, with the calm of someone who has thought through the implications and arrived at a settled position. Word travels differently when it concerns the gods. Whether Arachne's challenge reached Athena through divine awareness or through the ordinary channels of human gossip amplified by the particular resonance that challenges to divine authority always carry, it reached her. Athena heard what was being said in Hypeipa. She heard the claim. She heard the challenge. And here Athena does something unexpected, something that reveals a complexity in her character that the myth insists on, and that is easy to miss if you read the story too quickly. She does not immediately manifest in divine form and punish the presumption. She does not send a thunderbolt or a plague or any of the various instruments of divine displeasure that the mythology has available. She goes to Arachne, but she goes as an old woman, disguised, hunched, gray-haired, leaning on a staff, the worn and humble appearance of age that makes people lower their guard and speak more freely than they would to a younger stranger. Why? Why does the goddess of wisdom arrive in disguise rather than in her divine form? Because she is genuinely giving Arachne a chance. This is Athena acting with the full weight of her nature, thinking about the situation, considering what the best outcome would be, and designing an approach calibrated to achieve that outcome rather than simply the most obvious or satisfying approach. She is not interested in destroying Arachne. She is interested in whether Arachne can be reached, can be brought to understand something, can be offered the opportunity to step back from the edge she is approaching before the falling becomes inevitable. The disguise is not deception for its own sake. It is strategy in the service of mercy. The old woman speaks to Arachne gently. She acknowledges the girl's gifts, genuinely, without condescension, with the specific appreciation of someone who understands craft and recognizes genuine mastery when she sees it. She tells Arachne that her reputation is well deserved, that the things being said about her work are true, that there is no need to qualify the praise or attribute it to divine assistance rather than human effort. All of this is real. And then she says, still gently, still without thunder or threat, that the challenge to Athena should be withdrawn, that Arachne should seek the goddess's forgiveness for the presumption, even the presumption of a challenge not yet accepted, that there is still time, that the situation has not yet reached the point of no return, that wisdom in this moment would look like a small retreat from a position that carries enormous risk for no proportionate gain. Arachne's response is the heart of the story, and it is more interesting than the simple defiance that a lesser telling would give her. She does not rage. She does not perform contempt for the old woman's advice. She speaks with the specific clarity of someone who has already made their peace with the consequences of their position, who understands the risk and accepts it, who would rather face what comes from standing in their own truth than avoid it by pretending to a humility they do not feel. She says she wishes Athena would come. She says it directly. And then, in most versions of the myth, she says something to the old woman that suggests she already knows, on some level, who she is talking to. There is a quality in the exchange, a charge in the air between them that belongs to recognition rather than ordinary conversation. Arachne is not fooled by the disguise so much as choosing to respect it, engaging with the fiction because the fiction has been offered to her as a gift, the gift of the chance to back down without losing face before the goddess herself. She does not take the gift. The old woman straightens. The gray hair recedes or transforms. The hunched posture unfolds into the full divine height. The worn clothing becomes armor and gray cloak. The staff becomes a spear. Athena stands before Arachne in her own form, her gray eyes steady, her expression, and this is what all the versions of the myth agree on, not angry, grave. The gravity of a being who has offered what she could offer and had it declined, who now must see the situation through to its conclusion, who is already, perhaps, grieving what is coming. The contest begins. Two looms set up side by side on the hillside or in the great hall, the sources vary, and two weavers beginning to work simultaneously, each bringing everything they have to the cloth taking shape beneath their hands. What Athena wove, the story of the gods and their authority over the world. The 12 Olympians in their full divine majesty, Zeus with his lightning, Poseidon with his trident, each of the great gods depicted at the height of their power. At the corners of her cloth, 4 cautionary tales, 4 stories of mortals who had challenged divine authority and met the consequences. Rhodope and Haman, who called themselves Hera and Zeus, and were transformed into mountains. The pygmy queen Oenoi, who challenged Hera and became a crane, condemned to wage perpetual war against her own former people. Antigone of Troy, different from the Antigone we know from Sophocles, who challenged Hera to a contest of beauty and had her hair transformed into snakes. And Cinyras, weeping on the temple steps over the daughters he had challenged the gods to judge. 4 stories, 4 warnings, woven into the border of her cloth with the precise technical skill that is the foundation of all her other gifts, perfect in every thread. What Arachne wove, the crimes of the gods. This is the magnificent, terrible audacity of what Arachne did with her loom. She did not weave images of mortal pride or human achievement. She did not weave a self-portrait or a landscape or an abstract pattern, though any of these would have displayed her technical mastery as fully. She wove the specific stories of divine misbehavior, the long, embarrassing, morally complex record of what the gods had done when they desired something or someone that was not theirs to take. Europa and the bull. Zeus transforming himself into a white bull to abduct the Phoenician princess, her trusting hands in the bull's horns, the sea between her and her home growing wider. Leda and the swan. Zeus again. Another transformation. Another act that would not, in any mortal court, be called by any gentle name. Danae in her tower of bronze and the shower of gold. Zeus finding a way through every barrier. Proserpine and the flowers. Pluto erupting from the earth to take her, the flowers falling from her hands as she was seized. Medusa before Perseus. The beautiful girl, not yet the monster she would become, and behind her the shadow of what Poseidon had done in Athena's own temple. Apollo and Daphne. Apollo and Leucotho. Dionysus and his various disguises. Kronos and his children. The full catalogue of divine power exercised without restraint, without regard for mortal autonomy, without anything that a mortal ethical framework would call justice. And the technical execution, this is the detail that the myth insists on, that Ovid in particular makes absolutely explicit. The technical execution was perfect, every thread precisely placed, every figure alive, every story told with the clarity and emotional force of great narrative art. The cloth Arachne made was purely as an object of craft, the equal of anything Athena had ever made. Perhaps, and the myth allows this reading, even as it punishes her, perhaps better. Perhaps the emotional truth of what she had chosen to depict, the righteous anger that powered her hands through the telling of these stories, gave her cloth a quality that Athena's more controlled and didactic weaving lacked. Athena looked at it. She looked at it for a long time, and then she destroyed it. She struck the cloth, the perfect cloth, the technically irreproachable cloth, the cloth that told true stories with perfect hands, and she tore it from the loom. She struck Arachne with her shuttle. Once, the blow both punishment and something more complicated than punishment, something almost like the action of a being who is in pain and whose pain has briefly overridden the calculation that usually governs everything she does. What happened next depends on which version you read. In the most common version, Ovid's version, the one that has come down to us with the most narrative detail and the most psychological complexity, Arachne hanged herself. The shame, the destruction of her work, the physical blow from the goddess, the full weight of what she had done and what had been done to her in response. It was too much. She took a cord and hanged herself, and Athena, finding her, was moved by something. Pity, regret, the recognition of a genuine loss in the death of someone this extraordinary. The myth does not name what Athena felt, only what she did. She transformed Arachne. She sprinkled the hanging girl with the juice of aconite, that bitter herb associated with transformation and with the goddess Hecate. And Arachne changed. She shrank. Her hair fell away. Her fingers and toes became legs. Her body became the small, round form of a spider. And the thread she had hanged herself with became the first web spun from her own body, the thing she would make for the rest of her existence and teach her descendants to make. Descendants who fill every corner of the earth, who spin and weave in every ecosystem on the planet, who are the living continuation of the tradition that began with the most gifted mortal weaver the world had ever produced. The spider continues to weave. This is what the myth insists on in its conclusion, and it is worth stopping to consider what this means. Arachne was not destroyed. She was not erased. She was not removed from the world or from the tradition of weaving that she had made her own. She was transformed into a form in which she could continue to do the thing she did better than anyone, continue to do it forever, in fact, undying, spreading, her descendants covering the world with their extraordinary constructions. The punishment is also, if you look at it from a certain angle, a gift, a strange, terrible, involuntary gift, but a gift nonetheless. The weaving continues, the weaver continues, just not in the form she had. But before we arrive at any comfortable reading of this story, before we allow the transformation to soften what preceded it, we need to sit with the harder questions the myth raises and refuses to fully answer. Was Arachne wrong? The technical answer, the answer that Greek religious thought would have provided without much hesitation, is yes. The concept of hubris was not merely about pride or overconfidence. It was about the specific transgression of stepping outside the place assigned to you by the divine order of things, of reaching toward a status that belonged to a different category of being, of refusing to observe the distinction between mortal and divine that was, in Greek thought, one of the foundational structures of reality. Arachne was wrong not because she was incorrect about her ability, but because she was a mortal who refused to acknowledge the boundary between mortal and divine excellence, who insisted that the same standards applied to both, who would not accept that some comparisons were simply off limits regardless of their accuracy. But the myth also, and this is why it has survived and continues to matter, the myth also shows us Arachne's cloth. It shows us what she wove and what was in it. The crimes of the gods, depicted with perfect hands and righteous clarity. The truth that the official version, Athena's own cloth with its cautionary tales about the danger of challenging divine authority, was designed to suppress. And it shows us Athena destroying that cloth. Destroying not a lie or a distortion, but an accurate and beautifully rendered account of real things that happened, real harm that was done, real power that was abused by the beings who held it. This is not a comfortable story. It was not designed to be comfortable. The Greeks were not, in their mythology, interested in comfort. They were interested in truth, in the full complexity of what truth looked like when you examined it honestly, including the truths about their own gods that were not flattering and did not resolve neatly into either divine justice or divine mercy. Athena in this story is not simply the wronged goddess defending her honor against an upstart mortal. She is also a being who destroys a true record because the truth it contains is inconvenient, a being who strikes someone smaller than herself in a moment of what? Anger, pain, the recognition that the cloth on the loom is better than what she might wish it to be. She is the goddess of wisdom, and yet in this story, she does not act with perfect wisdom. She acts with the full, complicated, sometimes contradictory nature of a divine being who is also, in some deep sense, not entirely different from the mortals she watches over. And Arachne. Arachne who would not back down, who would not pretend to a humility she did not feel, who told the truth with her hands even when she knew, and she knew, what the truth would cost her. There is something in her that belongs to the tradition of the great truth-tellers, the great refusers, the figures in every mythology and every history who said what was true when silence would have been safer and have paid the price that truth-telling in the face of power always extracts. She was transformed into a spider. She was not silenced. Her descendants are everywhere. What does Athena's role in this story tell us about the nature of wisdom itself? This is perhaps the most interesting question the myth raises, and the one that connects most directly to everything we have explored in the preceding chapters of this account. Wisdom, as Athena embodies it, is not simply intelligence. it is not simply the accumulation of knowledge or the capacity for strategic thought. It is something more difficult and more demanding. The sustained attempt to see clearly and act justly in conditions of complexity and partial knowledge and competing claims and the constant pressure of one's own nature. Athena in the story of Arachne does not act with perfect wisdom. She acts with the wisdom available to her in that moment, which is imperfect, which is shaped by the specific nature of what she is and the specific pressures of what she has been challenged with. She is the goddess of wisdom, but she is not herself perfectly wise in every action she takes. She is, like all beings in the Greek conception of divinity, something more than mortal, but something less than absolute, a being of specific powers and specific limitations, capable of extraordinary things and also capable of the specifically divine variety of error. This is what makes her interesting. This is what makes the mythology of Athena something more than a simple allegory for the value of intelligence. The gray-eyed goddess, the daughter of Metis, born from Zeus's head, the patron of Athens, and the giver of the olive tree. She is not a symbol. She is a character, a being with a nature that includes contradictions, who does not always act in accordance with her own highest principles, who is moved by feelings that complicate her calculations, who is capable of something that looks, if you are willing to see it, very much like regret. She transformed Arachne rather than killing her. This choice matters. After the destruction of the cloth, after the blow with the shuttle, after the hanging, Athena could have left the situation as it was, or she could have simply let Arachne die as she had chosen to die. Instead, she intervened again. She changed the form of what Arachne was. She did not end what Arachne was. The weaver continues to weave. The thread continues to extend from the body that produces it, catching the light in doorways and between branches, engineering structures of extraordinary sophistication and beauty out of a material generated from within the body itself. Every spider is Arachne. Every web is a continuation of the contest on the hillside in Lydia. The two looms working side by side, the two kinds of excellence competing for a judgment that was never cleanly delivered, that the myth refuses to render as a simple verdict. Every spiderweb catching the morning light, and spiderwebs catch light with a specificity and beauty that still manages to stop people who are moving quickly through the world, who see the light on the silk and pause for just a moment before moving on. Every web catching the morning light is the ongoing work of the greatest mortal weaver who ever lived, transformed but not ended, continuing but not unchanged. This is where the story of Arachne ends, but it is also where it opens outward into the larger question that has been threading through everything we have explored in this account of Athena. The question of what it means to be mortal and excellent simultaneously, of what the relationship between human achievement and divine order actually is, of what wisdom requires of us in the conditions of actual existence rather than in the ideal conditions where wisdom would be easy. The answer that the mythology of Athena offers, taken as a whole, not any single story but the entire constellation of stories, from her birth from the head of Zeus through the contest for Athens, through the story of Arachne, and all the other encounters and interventions and presences that make up her divine biography. The answer is something like this. Wisdom is not a destination. It is a practice, a continuous, demanding, never completed practice of trying to see clearly and act justly and make things that are true, in full knowledge that you will not always succeed, that the complexity of what is real will sometimes exceed the capacity of even the best intelligence to navigate perfectly. That the gray hour between darkness and full light is where most of actual living takes place, not in the clarity of noon, but in the in-between, the transitional, the not yet resolved. Athena is the goddess of that gray hour, the hour before full light, when shapes exist before colors, when the world is still becoming what it is going to be, when the outcome is not yet fixed, and every decision still matters. She presides not over certainty, but over the process of moving toward it. Not over answers, but over the quality of thinking that produces the best available answers in conditions of irreducible uncertainty. She was born from a god's head, fully formed, fully armed, the embodiment of a principle that Zeus could not contain within himself, that had to be released into the world in its own form to do its work. The principle of intelligence applied to the full complexity of existence. The principle of craft and strategy, and the lamp and the olive tree, and the owl that sees in the dark, and the gray eyes that see clearly what other eyes distort or miss. She planted a tree on a rock. The tree still grows. In Athens today, on the Acropolis, there is an olive tree growing in the enclosure beside the Erechtheion, in the spot where the ancient tree stood, where the tree stood before the Persians burned it, where the new shoot emerged from the charred stump the day after the burning, still growing, still bearing fruit, still turning its silver-green leaves to catch the light that falls on the Attic plain in the particular way that light falls on that plain, with that quality that makes people, even people who have no particular interest in the sacred, reach instinctively for the word. The owl is somewhere. It is always somewhere. Small, preposterous, enormous-eyed, capable of seeing what no other creature can see in the conditions that defeat ordinary vision. Flying its silent circuit over the sleeping city, watching what cannot be watched by any other means, doing its work through the long hours that precede the dawn. And the gray hour comes, as it always comes. The hour between darkness and light, the hour that belongs to Athena, that she has always owned, that exists in every place where there is night and day and the long transitional space between them. The hour when shapes emerge before colors, when the world reasserts its structure before it reasserts its beauty, when the mind, if it has been working through the night on the problems that matter, if it has been weaving its own cloth in the darkness by the light of the olive oil lamp, the mind can see in that gray emerging light the pattern it has been trying to find. This is her gift, not victory, not invulnerability, not the salt spring of overwhelming force or the spectacular demonstration of power that silences opposition. The gray light of morning, the capacity to see in it, the patient, immortal, fire-surviving tree that gives oil for the lamp so the thinking can continue through the dark. The goddess born from a god's head, who carries wisdom in her very nature because wisdom was her mother, who has been present in every library and laboratory and studio and workshop where human intelligence has applied itself with full seriousness to the problem of understanding and making. She does not announce herself. She does not arrive in thunder or in blinding light. She arrives the way the morning arrives, incrementally, shaping, becoming visible before color, the world revealing itself as having a structure, a pattern, a form that was there through the darkness and is now in the gray light, available to be seen. Glaucopis, the gray-eyed one, the gleaming-eyed one, the one whose eyes are the color of the sea before dawn, of olive leaves in the wind, of the sky in the hour that belongs to her. She is still here. She was never not here. Look at the quality of the morning light. That is as close as we